Alright, so back to this, or should I say, welcome to this, right? I don't think this is the first black screen video I've done. I think I've done at least two more, because I think I did like an initial thoughts video, and then I think I did like a kind of post. Again, I would need to go back through the playlist, but I'm pretty sure I did like a kind of like, post like early after I had originally gotten stuck and kind of had to use all the passwords to basically continue the game, right? And then again, maybe potentially one that I got stuck at Samson as well, right? So I probably already have a couple few black screen videos, right? But those were more so, I think, just due to those were more so just due to like, again, it was like those weren't at seemingly a designated story by the game. It just so happened to be when I wanted to do those videos, right? So this is going to kind of be, I think, like a culmination of all of those, and really kind of like, I'd say, the first like major black screen video of mine in this game, right? And kind of like, again, Pokemon Reborn, like mid-game thoughts and opinions. And what I mean by mid-game is we have just reached the point in Devon Core where it tells us specifically, like, when we go in, we won't go back. Again, do I think we're, like, at the end of the game? No. I mean, we know there's still however much left. We still need to have our May badges, still need to fight the Elite Four and the League, right? But I think we're setting up for some major, like, story implications, specifically regarding, probably, I mean, we already had the first major choice, or the main choice that seemingly decides the direction the story goes in, which is, us choosing whether or not to fight Taka at the treatment center, right? And we chose not to. And again, we acknowledging we are locked out of the true route, right? Because we didn't beat Solaris at Pyrus, right? But so be it, right? Again, and unfortunately, because I don't plan on replaying through the game, I'm not going to go and fight Taka with the intention of going back and doing the true route, right? So again, basically, it's just like, that's where we're at. And, alright, I'll kind of really, let's go back to the very beginning, right? So, let's give some context as to my, like, sort of introduction to Reborn, right? So I learned about Reborn as part of, I think it's like a trilogy or like series where it's like you have Reborn, Rejuvenation, I think Desolation. And I kind of learned of it as like similar as part of those two. And I think I learned about it at roughly the time I was playing Uranium, because I think that's when I was kind of looking. It was, if we go, like, let's go way back. So, my first fan game was Insurgents, right? I started playing it in like 2018, I think, and I had to do the second run through because I lost my first one, and I played it throughout 2020 and beat the game summer and then winter of 2020, right? Main game and post game. And that was when I was in the middle of college. I didn't plan on playing another Pokemon fan game, right? That was kind of it, because it was one I started at the end of high school, right? So, again, my first one, right? And really the main thing was, but when I graduated college, that's when I kind of was looking for, if this was end of 2022, for another fan game to play, right? Fall. And again, Uranium, was kind of the one that came across the board, because it was like the premier, fan game. It was one of the first ones, if I recall. And again, a big thing was that it has its own region, right? Because again, I talk about this all the time. What attracts me to Pokemon is like the story, right? So like, having a new region to explore, I think, is a huge part of that. Which, again, because that was kind of where I learned about a lot of the other, that was when, after playing Reborn, I learned about a lot of the other fan games. Because I knew, like, okay, that was my second one. I'm probably going to play a few more, or however many more. And again, granted, I didn't immediately play Reborn. I played Infinite Fusion, because Infinite Fusion kind of blew up at the time. And again, I enjoyed it and think it was good, but I think it just cemented the idea of, okay, I want to play one that's a new region and a new story. Because for as cool as Infinite Fusion was, again, the fact that it still took place in the Johto Kanto region, again, is just something to where it's like, again, that kind of is an inherent limiting experience. And I talk about that in that black screen. But really, the main thing was, again, then it was kind of like, all right, what next? And then that's where Reborn landed. Because, again, I knew of it in relation to the two. And here's the thing, because I did plan on playing other games first, other, like, smaller fan games, but, because for me it was like, I played Uranium, which was a smaller fan game, and I played Infinite Fusion, which is kind of like, all right, it's not a new region. So, and I knew I was going to be gone and not be able to play Reborn for kind of the period or gap that I had, or I wasn't going to be able to play then. So I just committed to Reborn, right? And this was about, I'd say, February of last year. I think, it's like, it's been, I think, about a year since I started playing Reborn. So again, it's like, that's what actually got me into Reborn. So I went into it knowing it was a more comprehensive fan game, like Insurgents. So there's that, right? That's kind of my whole introduction to it, right? Because it is relevant later on. So I go in knowing it's a more comprehensive, more completed, more developed fan game, holding it to kind of a higher standard than, let's say, Uranium or Infinite Fusion. So that's my introduction to it, right? And now we can kind of get into, I'd say now just kind of playing it, right? My initial thoughts, basically getting to kind of where I'm at now in the mid game. So again, played through it, right? Really, I'd say the first major point was the Shade boss fight. And the reason being that was the first point in the game where I legit got like stuck. And this is going to be a recurring theme, which is why I'm going to bring up each like major point I get stuck. So again, and that had to deal with, if I recall in that fight, that had to deal with, again, a lot of just, let's say, the base game mechanics that aren't in other Pokemon games, right? So, for example, so let's put it this way. Obviously, in the base Pokemon games, right, mainline games, if you get a Pokemon that isn't yours and you don't have a certain gym badge, it won't obey you. Well, in Reborn, right, that was extended, right, where just any Pokemon won't obey you after a certain level. This creates kind of a problem, right? Especially, again, unless you have, and I'll talk about the passwords, right? Because basically, your entire team, if you get above whatever level cap, and I mean, granted, you have common candies designed to lower their levels, but again, it's just another mechanic, right? But you can just have Pokemon that are completely useless in fights because they're just past whatever level. And that's what happened to me in my team, I recall, because I think I had 6, but I was down 2 because of that. And I just was not able to beat Shade. And that was, again, so that was kind of the first point I was stuck, right? And that was when I went and used the passwords. Because by that point, I think I had like 2, maybe 3 of, I don't know if it's like the discs or whatever, but again, and I kind of talked about this during previous Black Screen. So I went in and I did all of the quality of life. I did quality of life, easy mode, and then I think there was another one. I think it was like the all like booster pack or something. The big one was I did quality of life, which that one was like okay, your Pokemon cap at the level max rather than keep going and they disobey you, stuff like that. And then the easy mode, what that did was it was like, all right, the opponent's teams aren't fully EV/IV trained, they don't get items, again, stuff like that, right? So basically, I dumbed down the game from its initial difficulty to like, I'd say just a standard Pokemon game, basically, right? That's pretty much what I turned it into. I took all those, like, I guess, extra mechanics designed to make the game more difficult and challenging, and basically, either disabled a lot of them, right, or just made them more, like, reasonable, right? And, again, that's kind of something I've talked about, and something that, 1, I don't really have any qualms about, right? But 2, again, it's something to where it's like, again, and this is a good point to talk about. So, and first, I probably should have said this, very first off, right? I've enjoyed playing through Reborn, right? Pokemon Reborn. I very much enjoyed playing through. I enjoy playing the game. That's why I'm still playing it, right? But I'd say I have more gripes and qualms with Reborn than I did, like, let's say, Insurgents, right? Because Insurgents is the one I'm always going to compare it back to. Which, granted, I definitely have bias towards because it's my first fan game, right? But again, because it's another kind of like comprehensive one, right? It's not like Uranium, it's not like Infinite. It's kind of its own comprehensive one, similar to that. Again, the difference between Insurgents, to be fair, Insurgents is, like, I don't want to say a sequel to Zeta and Omicron, but it's kind of like in that line or retrospect. And funny enough, you get some like what would you call it, hints towards like, what is it, what Azurite, which still isn't out yet. But again, on the flip side, let's put it this way, right? So like again, Reborn, and then Rejuvenate. Again, we'll reach that point when we get there, right? But again, the point being, I question kind of and I'll talk about when I get to Samson. I went in knowing it was going to be more comprehensive, more difficult, right? For me, what I thought that meant and what my hope was that it would just be more challenging, but in like, let's put it this way, and I know I'm kind of sidetracking. If you see my Civilization 5 videos, right, that's the deity difficulty. The AI doesn't get smarter. They just get a ton more bonuses. I liken kind of that in Reborn to it, right? I thought it was going to be just more challenging fights because, the opponents have tougher teams. Not it being something to where it's like, oh, I'm dealing with quality of life issues, I'm dealing with all of this, right? Again, I figured it was going to be more along those lines, right? Which, again, it's something to where, and again, because I've got the game in as easy of a state without actually just destroying the experience and using it to turn like all my opponent's Pokemon to like level 1 or into like Budu or some bullshit, right? But again, so rather than just get more challenging fights, right, or more challenging, sequences, right, instead it's like, okay, you just got all this other baggage to deal with. And that's, exemplified in the second, time where I got stuck, I guess, and that would be, Samson, right? Again, Samson being the first of the big top you actually fight, right? And again, that is just like the whole setup for that is just, again, not only is it such an unfair field effect and the setup for it is insane, but you also can't even access the rest of the region, which to me that's just like, all right, come on. Like, it's the combination of the two. To me, that's just bad design. The only way we were able to beat it and we didn't have to just completely kill the run was I just so happened to have a synthetic seed that allowed my Hawlucha to sweep. That was the only reason we were able to beat Samson. There was no other, we were not beating him any other way. That was the only way we would. If we didn't have that single synthetic seed, we would not have beaten him, and we would have had to completely kill our Pokemon Reborn run through. And again, to me, that's just like, it's kind of the same thing where it's like, because it's not just the fact that you have a stupidly challenging fight, it's the fact that you have that and you can't access the rest of the region. So it's like, you're just fucked. Like, I mean, it just so happened that I had that synthetic seed. If I didn't, legit, we wouldn't be continuing the run. And that goes into kind of the field effects thing, because I'd say the field effects is different from the whole quality of life, like, Pokemon refusing to obey you, them, like, cheating with, like, items. Again, stuff like IVs, EVs, fully IV, EV train. Again, so it's stuff to where it's, like, basically just, because that's just kind of, like, little things to, like, either annoy you or, like, buff the opponent, right? That's kind of little stuff, right? But, again, more quality of life. And this gets into kind of, Pokemon Reborns, because one of Pokemon Reborn's main core, like, additions, again, Insurgents, the big thing Insurgents added was deltas, right? You had Pokemon that of different types, right? Then their standard variation. That was, their big addition. The big thing that Reborn's added is, again, field effects, which are on top of, what is it called? Just the normal, like, field moves, right? It's separate from field moves, which are like, or I guess terrain, right? But again, the field effects, and again, it's like the core edition. Here's what I'm gonna say. And this kind of gets into now where we're getting into like my like issues with the game, right? Because I'm gonna pivot from this, because this is like my main issue with the game, right? Again, I very much enjoy the game, but this is my main issue with the game, because with field effects being kind of their main addition, you'd think it would be implemented better. The issue with field effects is because there are so goddamn many. There's like 20 or 25. What ends up happening, and I think the Big Top Arena is a perfect example of that, and a perfect example of my issues with the game. you come across a opponent's field effect or a field effect who an opponent's team is basically solely designed to take advantage of. And there's just nothing you can do about it because there's like so goddamn many. If there were like, let's say, 4 field effects and it would kind of like rotate through during the game, that would be a different story. And I think that would be a lot better than what we got, where you just have like 20 billion different ones, and then it's like each opponent. And again, you also get a boss fight like every 5 minutes, like at least it feels like, or a boss level fight, right? You know, which again kind of degrades the meaning of it, right? But it is something to where it's like, you know, again, like, and they're solely designed to take advantage of that. So there's just like nothing you can do but just hope to get lucky. And then on top of that, you have quality of life where, you know, some of your Pokemon may obey you. They have fully EV trained, again, items. So it's just, again, you know, if it were a one or the other thing, because let's say you didn't have to, granted, I use the passwords to make it so that I don't deal with quality of life. But even then, I'm still dealing with all the field effects, right? The big top is like the perfect example because I feel like that had to have fucked up so many people's like runs, right? You know, that had to have like killed. I swear to God, Samson had to have killed so many people's runs. I refuse to believe that that was not an issue. But you know, kind of, I'd say like the next thing, you know, or after that, right? But then on top of that, you got quality. So it's like I just wish is like Reborn's primary addition to the actual game and like core gameplay mechanics of the game itself. It was just implemented better, right? Again, because it's just, again, I expected a more comprehensive, more difficult game. I just wish it meant that we're actually going up against more challenging teams and fights rather than just kind of the cheese stuff that we get out of that. So, but again, with that, I kind of got that out of the way, right? That's like my main gripe with the game. And that's something I think I haven't really been able to put in words or solidify up until this black screen, right? But that's really it. I'm going to be honest. That's really my only issue with the game is I just think that could have been done way better or in a way that isn't as annoying to the player, right? And some people may be like, oh, yeah, get good. Well, all right. I mean, you know, whatever. So, not helpful, right? I'm just glad they have the password so I can at least evade the quality of life stuff. But again, that's really my only issue with oh yeah, it's in a I'm not a big fan of the Gen 3 art style, but that is completely unrelated. I'm just biased towards the Gen 4 art style. So it is something to where it's like I'm always going to be preferencing that, right? But again, you know, it's like so I'll always preference the Gen 4 art style, right? Let's put it that way. But again, you know, it's like so just not as big a fan of the Gen 3. But that's it. Like that's really my only like core that's my core and really only issue that I have with the game, right? So now we can get on to what I like about it, right? And again, you know, let's just start listing them off, right? Again, I've kind of been, I guess, critical enough, but again, that's kind of the point, right? You know, usually if I'm covering something good that I like, I start off with the bad and then go into the good. Vice versa, if I'm covering something bad, I'll start with the good, then go into the bad, right? So first things first, region design fucking fantastic. You know, again, like I love the idea of you have this city with multiple wards and then you have kind of the outskirts and what's outside. It is fantastic and it is implemented like perfectly where everything's like interconnected versus like again, you know, because you even see it in Insurgents where it's like you have kind of a region which is just towns with like routes in between them, right? But this is like the idea of Reborn City and outside the walls is just fucking fantastic and perfectly implemented, I'd say. You know, again, like, and especially like, because we're getting to the point of the game, you know, and this is more of a story implication, but we're seeing the city actually change and evolve and improve, right? But yeah, so region design, fucking fantastic. Soundtrack, fucking fantastic, right? You know, again, I love all that they're using, like all the remixes and whatnot, right? But then also all like the ward themes and shit too, right? So it's like, because you have a very clear like leitmotif, you know, that they follow and that they'll like, you know, alter, right? But again, it's just music fantastic, right? I've loved the music of the game, right? You know, music fantastic. So just very two kind of quick hitting him off the bat. At least initially, I liked Pokemon being more scarce. And it was something to where like you kind of, again, obviously later on, when you get kind of more outside of the city and in other areas, they become more common. But again, just it being more scarce and it being something where you actually have to like kind of, especially if you're like nuzlocking. And God, I can't imagine nuzlocking that. But again, kind of adapting to that, right? That is like more of a challenge that I'm willing to like deal with, right? All right, and now let's get on to the main thing I enjoy about Reborn, the story, right? The story. Uranium's all right. I liked the whole twist of Uranium and Curie, and again, being your mother, right? I just spoiled the fuck out of Uranium for anyone who didn't play it. Insurgents, obviously, I like the story. I think the stories where Reborn excels, specifically involving Team Meteor, right? And here's what I'm gonna say. I will say again, another actually like again an issue or complaint. The story is kind of all over the place, right? It's so hard to fucking keep track of, and I think that's evident. Like there's like stuff I'm doing. I'm like I've apparently we did shit, and but to be fair, a lot of that I do want to cough up and acknowledge too the fact that I had like an 8 to 9 month break in playing Reborn. So again, it is just something to where it's like that is something to point out and notice. But again, it's something to where it's like, but it is just it's kind of all over the place, right? But in terms of the story, right, and again specifically Team Meteor, I think Team Meteor is so well done because it really is kind of like this story in a sense almost revolves around Team Meteor, right? Again, because let's put it this way: in Insurgents, and again, this is a comparison. In Insurgents, the big question was again, obviously, you were doing the gyms, you were fighting the cults, but really, kind of the big thing was okay, who are you? And then ultimately, the big thing was what was this underlying force the whole time, which ended up being Nyx, right? In the Giratina cult. So it kind of you had a few converging things, right? But at least from what we've gotten out of the story so far in Reborn, right? Again, and specifically involving Team Meteor is again, it's like obviously they're and I don't want to. Oh yeah, also I'm stupid. I played Gaia as well. I almost completely forgot about that, right? Yeah, we played Pokemon Gaia, right, with the whole New Elders thing, right, or whatever. So we played Gaia. That was a thing we did too, right? I almost forgot about that. Yeah, that's how I guess forgettable. But I did enjoy the story, right? I thought it was pretty solid, right? It was just again also kind of like Uranium, right? But again, this, right? Again, Team Meteor is kind of the main driving factor for the story because the big thing is with Team Meteor, right? And it goes into kind of the lore of the region. So again, Reborn City seemed to be like an ancient, like city, civilization, whatever that eventually collapsed, right? And has kind of rebuilt itself over time, right? And again, but it seems to be again at like another tipping point, right? And a lot of it is directly caused by Team Meteor, but also some of it outside just due to kind of the natural factors and progression of the region. I mean, you start off in Reborn City and it's low key kind of a dump. Lapis Ward's really the only nice one. So enter Team Meteor, right? And you kind of you scrap with Team Meteor for like a bit. But then you kind of find out, well, one, you meet Solaris, right? And he just wipes your team in a force lose battle. Or you beat him and you put yourself on the true route. But, the main thing and kind of where the main actual story sets in is, again, you get the whole New World Order cultists, right? Which are by Borealis, right? And then you kind of basically, it's a whole like, oh, they're trying to recreate the world, right? You discover the jewels, right? Discover the power they hold. You're at whatever, like Arceus Temple, And again, basically, like, they aren't able to execute their plan or whatever, but you kind of know what's going on or what's like the end game, or I should say, like what they're trying to set out to accomplish, right? Which again, pretty standard stuff. However, where it becomes a lot more interesting is you've got a lot more going on the side of Team Meteor, and because what I say is that I really do. It does seem like everyone and their mother is joining Team Meteor, right? But again, like versus like let's say, I mean, obviously, and it's kind of funny because again, in Insurgents you have like the different cults, right? Which I already loved about it. With Team Meteor, right? It's all part of the same umbrella organization, but you have like varying levels. So like For example, one of the first instances we saw was that, okay, we had like, it was, I don't remember their name, but it was the dad whose daughter had the ruby ring, that he was working with Team Meteor so that he could keep it a secret, and he failed and then killed himself, right? That's one of like the first examples you see, okay, like this dude's like actually like not with Team Meteor, he's like against it or whatever, right? You know, then you get the whole thing with, you get Cal and Solaris at Mount Pyrus, and Solaris killing, again, the leader of Apophel, right? And Cal kind of falling out with Team Meteor over that, right? Then you get the whole thing with apparently Ace has been usurped, right? And then now, she was, again, Taka kind of had, a change of heart, and Ace again, is working with them to like, actually like keep the families quote unquote together with them and Solaris, right? But again, obviously something happened. We still don't know. Again, and you have in kind of in the background of what's going on, and what we're seemingly about to go confront is this new blood kind of rising through the ranks and scheming to put themselves in a position of power in the form of Lynn, right? And I'm very curious to see how our confrontation is going to look like. But again, because they put Terra in place, they're beefing with Sirius, who I'd say is, I don't want to say is Solaris's right hand man, but again, like pretty close. Oh yeah, and then also Dr. Connell was a whole thing, right? He's just vaguely associated with Team Meteor, but like again, still like I guess again, that's where it's like I really love how they did Team Meteor and how a lot of the story is driven directly by what Team Meteor is doing. Like it's almost kind of like they're really the ones who are driving the story, which again, because I'd say most of the other games, it's not really. I mean, to be fair, you do kind of get it. You don't really get it in Uranium because you don't really confront Uranium Curie towards the end. Gaia, you get it a bit with like the whole New Elders thing, right? But same deal. Even in Insurgents, it's like because the cults have their like section, but again, you also have the overarching story of who you are, and then the whole mix thing, right? So, but again, ultimately, but it's still foreign part of because you end up doing the whole Pokemon League, right? But in Reborn, more than anyone we've seen so far, it really is a villain and antagonistic driven story, right? With pretty much Team Meteor is like the ones directly driving the story, and they like I'm very excited to see what happens. Again, it's not like as simple as okay, you have Solaris and you have us, and because that was, let's say, the New Elders, because the New Elders in Gaia, it was a very straightforward like okay, you had the leader. You had the admins, they were trying to accomplish their goals, and that was basically it, right? With Team Meteor, there's a lot more factors. And again, you also have story splits, so you can literally get different outcomes in different, granted, I don't think it's to the point to where, like, you just get a completely different story, right? But you can get, like, different outcomes and, I don't want to say endings, but, like, results based on the choices you make. But again, it's still something to where it's like, and again, obviously, because I mean, a part of it is whether or not we fight Taka. And I think, again, one of the choices we had was whether or not we fight Sirius, and I don't think we did. I think we fought Dr. Connell twice, right? If I recall, or at least stopped him one time, fought him the other, right? But again, it's like, so again, I really do appreciate and love the fact that it's mostly driven by Team Meteor, because that is something that just makes it that much more interesting. And again, it's something to where I think we're in a position to where it's like we kind of don't really know what's going to happen. Like it's not like, because I feel like Gaia, like Gaia, Uranium, right? Again, even Infinite Fusion to an extent. I don't want to say I kind of knew what was going to happen in Insurgents, because you had some decent plot twists in Insurgents, right? But again, I'm playing through Reborn. I have no idea what's going to happen next. Like at each thing that happened, like that, and that's part of that's what plays into the fact that it's like, oh yeah, the story's just all over the place, which again would normally be a bad thing, but I think because a lot of it is because it's mainly antagonistic driven, and again, it's something, and again, I'm coming up on 30 minutes, so I'm just going to kind of end it here. Because, again, this is really just a mid-game thoughts and opinions. We still have the rest of the game to play through, right? Again, it's something to where, like, the overall kind of like, I guess, assessment is like, again, core gameplay mechanics wise, I wish the field effects were implemented differently and were in, again, kind of designed differently, right? So that way it just doesn't end up you come across a boss every 5 minutes and they just have a team completely tailored to one field effect and just destroy you with it. On top of quality of life issues, that would be the case if I didn't use passwords. I wish that was different, right? That's my main primary issue with the game. Other than that, love the story, love the, aesthetics of the game, right? And I'm very excited to see what happens next, Ryan, where we kind of go with it. But that, we've reached around 30 minutes, so I'm just going to end it here. So, yep, that is all I have for this one. See you in the next one.